Well, I think we have to do this all over again, don't we? So welcome to a new episode of the To the Contrary podcast. I am joined by Tom Nichols from The Atlantic. Tom, welcome back. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me back.
Okay, I want to start with a mega question or a meta question. Why are we still so surprised? Why are we still, after all of this, why are we still capable of being surprised? And I'll tell you what I'm specifically referring to a little bit later. But, at 8 o'clock last night, I'm, sitting there with, a gin and tonic watching something on Netflix and, made the mistake of doing some doom scrolling. And it feels like, getting kicked in the stomach. And I'm thinking, why, after all this time, are we still shocked by shit that is coming down from this administration? Help me out here, Tom.
Well, part of it is because we're human beings and we love normalcy. We keep saying to ourselves, nothing really. I mean, how bad could it be?
Well, that's right. How bad could it be?
It's like it didn't. And also, we're kind of like the guy, your drunk friend drove you home a few times and it was a little scary after a night at the bar, but you got home every time, right? You didn't die. You didn't have a big flaming wreck. And so it's like, well, yeah, he has a few drinks, but I mean, he's okay. We can, that's true right up until the moment it's not. Yeah. And so that's a part of it that we're just people. And we just hate to think, I mean, this was why, during the Cold War, we didn't want to think about nuclear war, right? It's too big. It's not going to happen. Everything's fine. And if we had known half the shit that was going on, we wouldn't have slept nights. Yeah. But I think the other part of it is that people are, especially I think a lot of people who either actively supported Trump or who kind of made a deal with themselves to say, well, I'm going to support him because eggs are whatever the rationalization was. It's hard for them now to say, it's hard to say you were wrong. It's hard to process that.
But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people like us who wrote cover stories, who wrote endless articles saying it's going to be bad. It's going to be terrible. Trump 2.0 is going to be exponentially worse. There's nothing that's happening now that we did not warn about, and yet we're still shocked and surprised by it. I'm going to part company with you a little bit, Charlie, and say, this is my only surprise right now is that it hasn't gotten worse faster. Okay. Fair.
So I'm still bracing. I mean, I do the same thing. I'm doom scrolling too. And I'm saying, here it comes. I mean, it's just going to be, I don't think we're approaching a crisis of government. I think, really since 2017, at least for those 4 years, but now, maybe I wasn't. Maybe I had a failure of imagination 4 years ago about how bad it could get, but I don't feel like I think if anything, I find myself saying, what terrible thing is going to happen next, and what terrible stuff is going on that I'm not even aware of yet.
Well, see, that is the failure of imagination, and I think that's something we need to confront because. And I think that to the extent that people are surprised or shocked, it is because of this failure of imagining what could happen next. So, okay, as a digression, I know that you've already finished it, so no spoiler alerts, but I was watching this new Robert De Niro miniseries on Netflix, 0 Day, where he plays an ex-president and there's a disaster. And it did occur to me at a certain point. Okay, by the way, you can tell it's completely fictional. Because there's an African-American woman president, right? There's a speaker of the House of Representatives who's actually actively involved in government and is willing to push back on the president. So you know that it's fiction. And you know that it's fiction because lots of people are really, really concerned about civil liberties. Okay, so leaving aside,
to get past the opening episode, you have to believe that a guy like De Niro, talks like this. Yep. Got elected president, get a little bit of a stretch. The New Yorker who got, and so every time I see De Niro, I think, I would like to live in a country or a guy, a hard-assed old man from New York City who, kind of has this kind of, hey, could be elected president. If
Yeah.
you can get by
Yeah.
that, the rest of it will fall into place.
Well, we do have a guy from New York City who got elected president, but it was not Robert De Niro. So we
Yeah,
don't live
well,
we don't live
right.
in that
It's the
world.
guy. It's the guy De Niro hated at the end of the bar.
Well,
But
exactly.
yeah,
But it occurs to me at a certain point, though, that if there is a crisis, that if there is an attack, if there is something that happens, that creates a national emergency, that we need to begin to use our imagination to imagine how might a Donald Trump who controls the military, who is unaccountable and immune, who controls the FBI and the CIA, who's been willing to use the power of government, what might he be willing to do in terms of shutting? Because obviously he is not concerned about civil liberties. He is not concerned about incremental change. I mean, this is one of those things where it feels as if the lack of guardrails has not been completely. We have not totally factored in the extent to which the guardrails have collapsed and the willingness of this administration to exceed its powers. So, who would stop the president from declaring martial law and suspending elections? Would it be the courts? Would it be Congress? Would it be what institution would stand up to him?
I think the most disconcerting thing when you think about that scenario, Charlie, is that to think about all the things that Trump could do that are already within his legal authority.
Yes.
Like when you're talking about the courts or who's going to step in or who's going to, put a stop to this. The problem is, especially since 1945, especially because of arrangements and institutions that we put in place during the Cold War, the American system of government is organized around allowing the president to take dramatic actions in the case of a national emergency. Because remember, we're old guys. What would a national emergency be? Musk, Washington in flames, millions of people dead. The president needs to be able to act. So he still has all those powers. And the only thing that we ever counted on to restrain the actions of a president under those circumstances is the belief that the American people would never elect a kook or a dictator. So we just, this is the Madisonian guardrail of, yes, someone could do bad things, but the American people will never elect someone like that.
Yeah.
Well, now you have, and now he has a full panoply of amazing powers at his disposal that are perfectly legal and within the Constitution. Now, who could install limits on that action? In the first instance, the answer is Congress. Congress is the Article 1 power, and they're gone. They're not. Yeah. They don't.
That's not going to happen.
This is not their problem. They don't want to hear about it. They either agree with him, or they're afraid of him, or they are just craven opportunists who just want to, that when the terrible things start happening in Washington, they want to make sure they have a limo and a driver. Mm-hmm. The courts are already doing this, and they're standing alone. The courts are on their own right now. But without some national sense of urgency from the people, from the states, from Congress, they can issue rulings. But as we're seeing, in this confrontation over immigration, Trump just says, I didn't hear that, garbled. Yeah. Didn't get the message. Planes already in international waters,
Whoopsie.
Oops. Yeah. Sorry. Didn't get the message.
So what would a sense of urgency look like, though?
Well, the problem is that to really translate to a sense of urgency in the Congress, you would actually have to have Republicans who care.
Well, exactly.
Because they control the Congress.
So that's not going to happen.
After 2026, if Democrats take the House, urgency would look like hearings and subpoenas and passing laws that then dare the Senate to block them. Right. 2026 could be everything.
It
in
could
a
be everything.
situation like this.
Well, let me
But
go
also
back
a
to
sense of urgency that in the national reporting. I mean, we're still getting these kind of vaporous headlines about Trump, testing the limits of executive power. And there was one, I guess, in the Washington Post the other day. Trump has a plan for the economy, but he's not explaining it well.
I saw that. Yes, that was a for
What?
fuck's sake headline. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so going back to the surprise though, and because I really have been trying to think about this, and I think part of it is that I am personally not shocked or surprised by what Trump is doing. I think obviously it's rather extraordinary, the speed and the volume with which he's doing it, but all of that was predictable. What I did not see coming was what Ron Fournier is now calling the crisis of capitulation. One, institution after another, whether it was the billionaires, whether it's the media, whether it's ABC, the rush to obey in advance, and not just in government, but in civil society. And so we all woke up on Friday morning. Actually, I got kicked in the stomach Thursday night reading this story in the New York Times. Law firm bends in face of Trump demands. Paul Weiss, one of 3 law firms targeted by President Trump as part of his retribution campaign, said it resolved the conflict by agreeing to a range of commitments. Okay, I just want to read this. President Trump and the head of the law firm Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison LLP, big-time law firm, have reached a deal under which Trump will drop the executive order he leveled against the firm, Mr. Trump said on Thursday. In the deal, the firm agreed to a series of commitments, including to represent clients no matter their political affiliation and contribute $40 million in legal services to causes Trump has championed. Okay, so this is extortion in plain sight. And let me do one more. Members of the legal profession said in interviews they were surprised by the deal, as it appears as if the firm, which is dominated by Democrats and has long prided itself in being at the forefront of the fight against the government for civil rights, yeah, fuck that, was capitulating to Trump over an executive order that is likely illegal. So you put that next to this story in Politico. Universities are caving to Trump with a stunning speed and scope. Colleges and universities across the country are capitulating to President Donald Trump with staggering speed, moving to slash progressive policies and crack down on student activism as they face compounding threats from an administration hell-bent on reshaping higher education. So it's not just that the resistance seems to be scattered. There are people who have just jumping up, waving the flag, saying, not me. And it starts with the billionaires, starts with the big corporations. Now these giant law firms exist to screw you, right? To fight back. Universities, are these strong institutions with these great traditions, and they're all caving in. And I think that's the really shocking element of 2025. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we go back to the question of the failure of imagination, I obviously am not a lawyer. I've never worked at a law firm. Mm-hmm. I'm doing this as, long distance psychoanalysis. I think that there is an idea taking hold that, look, we now know because of Trump's age and, it's his second term, we only have to put up with this guy for another 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So let's just cut all the deals we have to cut, excuse me, to keep him out of our soup as best we can. Let's just, because it's not forever. Right. And I that's my guess. Charlie.
Wouldn't it be the opposite, though? Know. Wouldn't it be that if we only have to deal with him for 2 years, don't make don't cover ourselves with shame in this particular way? Because you might have a Democrat in the White House at some point who's going to remember this shit.
But, well, first of all, Democrats don't hold those kinds of grudges, right? I mean, they don't do the revenge tour the way Trump does. The other thing I think is, you said law firms are there to fight. They're also there to settle. This feels like this is going to be years of painful combat. it's going to be difficult and it's going to drag us into the limelight. Let's just settle. The 40 million to causes the president cares about was the part that just blew my mind. I'm like, who does that? Who says, okay, fine, and we will basically make our politics congruent with yours? Now, with the universities, I think in a way, look, law firms exist to fight for you, yes, but they also exist to make money. So again, having never been a lawyer who has to work for billable hours, I don't know why they did it. Yeah. But with universities, where I've spent a big chunk of my life, as you know, as a professor, the first thing I thought, I have a degree from Columbia. I have a graduate degree from Columbia. So, first thing I thought was, you have a multi-gazillion dollar endowment. Why wouldn't you just tell Donald Trump, keep your $150 million?
Yeah.
That's why we have an endowment. The whole point of an endowment is so that you're not beholden to so that it can't be turned into Trump University, so that the federal government can't tell you what to do. Yes, you have to be in accordance with the law because you want to have solid partnerships between universities and the government. I really believe that's good for the country, to have the United States government and our best universities funding, exchanging ideas. I always thought that was, I think, in fact, if I can digress for 1 second, one of the terrible things that happened after Vietnam was that universities really wanted to hold the government at arm's length because of, because people were coming up with things like Agent Orange and, the Rand Corporation and bombing and all that. Anyway, but I don't understand why the universities don't just say, together, the Ivies alone have endowments that are like bigger than countries. And I don't understand this preemptive caving. I don't get it.
Well, I think they're flabby. They're not used to fighting. I think they've been so insular in terms of their values. They cutting off, that they have, and also become so addicted to outside money. Look, I've been very, very critical of higher education. In fact, I wrote a book in the before times called, Fail You, the false promise of higher education. Talking about the incredible, explosion of tuitions and expenses and student debt, the flight from teaching, all of that, the indulgence in all sorts of, I would say, boutique ideologies that left them, I think, unprepared to deal with outside pressure. But leaving that aside, I wonder, and this is going to be my moment of naivete. If at some point what we see going forward is going to be a resurgence of, or at least respect for, libertarian small government. And let me just say this, because, this is something that conservatives warned about for many years, that a government that is big enough to do anything for you is also big enough to do anything for you. And this moment where we realize how powerful government has become, how intimidating government has become, how many institutions and individuals are now afraid of their government. This is what you get when you become entangled with government. And at one time, conservatives argued, all of those goodies come with strings, and somebody that you don't like someday may pull those strings, and then poo. Well, now it's happening. So to your point about the universities, maybe you're going to have to get off the government teat at some point, or at least reduce your reliance.
The point about the strings, I mean, I remember those arguments when I was,
remember those days.
Part of that, the before times. But I think one thing was, of course, the expectation that presidents are successful, educated people and couldn't possibly hate universities, which was a mistake. Yeah. But the other, I think, as we've been talking about this, I keep thinking that part of the vibe, I'm going to go with vibes here for a second. Yeah. Part of the vibe I get is just make this guy go away. Yeah. Like, just say whatever you have to. He'll be gone. Right. Make him go away. Throw him a bone. Feed him.
Tell him he's wonderful.
They're underestimating him and the people around him by thinking, look, he's just stupid. And if you just pay him off, of course, once you pay the Dane Geld, it never stops. But I think they really have this sense of, okay, this is going to blow over. Just pay him off, make him go away. He'll move on to something else. Now the history of Trump is that he will always find some other shiny lure in the water to go chase at some point. But I don't think the problem is that they've thought, unlike 2017, they've had 4 years to think this through.
Yeah.
A friend of mine made a very interesting point the other day. She said, it would have been better if Trump had just been reelected in 2020. It's an interesting thought experiment to say, because then they wouldn't have had 4 years to sit around and gnaw on these grievances and come up with all these kooky plans and set up these networks and, pump all this poison. And also Trump would have had to deal with the after effects of COVID and the inflation and all the stuff that was going to come. But it didn't happen. So now here we are. And I think that there's an exhaustion in the American establishment that says, whatever, fine, we'll sign whatever you want, just go away. And he's not going to go away. It's not going to end with $40 million of chump change to say, yeah, we'll pursue immigration cases that you happen to like, or fine, we'll tell the kids to cool it on the anti-Semitism, we'll let you look at our curriculum. I mean, it's not going to end.
No, it's not. It's not going to end. So let's talk about this fight about the judges and the rule of law, because and again, as a thought experiment, and maybe this is not a thought experiment, but here's an uncomfortable fact, I think, for some of our listeners, that Donald Trump right now is having the fight that he wants over deportation of these gang members. We may look at it as a dangerous war against the judiciary. He was always going to wage a war against the judiciary. This should not be a surprise. He's a convicted felon who has been demeaning and attacking judges for as long as I can remember. You go back to June of 2016, he's attacking the judge who was presiding over the Trump University case. Remember, he attacked him, saying he was biased because he was Mexican. And back then, you had Republicans like Paul Ryan who were willing to say that was textbook racism, but it's not new. But so the fact that he's attacking judges, you kind of would see that. But now he's framing it, and his supporters are framing it as, you're either for these terrorists or against these terrorists. I am deporting dangerous criminals. And you and I don't know how you feel about it, but in the past, and maybe this is where I was going with that Robert De Niro show, that when people think there's a real threat, and when it's law and order versus due process is always a fragile thing in American culture. It's one of the reasons why we built up so many guardrails around it, because the impulse is that when you're under threat, that you go with anything, lock them up, throw them away, use enhanced interrogation. But so Donald Trump likes the fact that he's picked a fight when he's dealing with what he says are violent gang members that are being deported. And he's got his entire MAGA base aligned with him on this. So this makes it a especially dangerous moment for the rule of law and for the judiciary, is my point.
Yeah, because the plaintiffs are the least appealing people in the world.
Exactly. Right.
And of course, Americans who pride themselves on equal justice before the law, even for the most horrendous, skeeviest, nastiest defendants. We say that.
Right.
But I always think of that great line from one of my favorite movies, Silverado, where Brian Dennehy's the sheriff and he says, we're going to give you a fair trial and a first class hanging.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is very much in the American bloodstream.
It is very much.
We believe in the rule of law. That's why you get a fair trial and then a first class hanging.
Yeah.
And Trump's people, again, I'm thinking back to 2017 and when he was in that first night in the White House and the lighting was all garish and they didn't know that everybody's kind of wandering in and out and he's doing his scrawl and holding stuff up, and it was so slapdash and dumb. Mm-hmm. They've had 4 years to say, we're not going to do that again. Right. This time we're going to pick fights over things that we know will end up in the courts, that we know will be accompanied by video of some of the most unsavory human beings we can find. And we're going to dare the judges to tell us that we can't send a guy covered in gang tattoos, back to wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they've extended that away from this particular instance to repeating, because that's partly the way Trump gets through to his voters, is simple repetition, by repeating, judges can't make these decisions.
Right.
Judges make these decisions all the time. They've been making them all the time for years, because that's our system of government. For the Trumpers, that's a flaw. That's a mistake. That's a constitutional error. For us, it's how our system is designed, because one day it's not going to be a guy covered in tattoos. It's going to be you.
Right. And again, that's something, but that's an abstraction. This gives them a chance to circulate, to have their cruelty porn go viral of all of the all the detainees naked in El Salvadoran prisons. So I just think people need to understand that there's a class of punditry that's always like, well, this is not going to work, or this is going to backfire. Anytime someone takes a law and order position after a crisis or after a riot or after a terrible crime, they're going to be able to, they will have a lot of support for that. And I think that's, again, part of the danger. Okay. So
the clever thing they're doing,
yeah.
The clever thing they're doing is they're picking this fight now to establish a larger principle that judges don't matter.
Right.
And one day it's not going to be about immigration. It's going to be about your civil rights. It will be about whether the only thing standing between you and some arbitrary, authoritarian, dare I say, fascist, move where people are arrested and detained without, warrant, and habeas corpus goes out the window and all that stuff, that some judge says you can't do this. And we have already gotten used to the idea that we don't really care what a judge says about it.
Well, you're absolutely right. And also we ought to recognize that this is not strictly or uniquely Trumpian, that conservative Republicans have been talking about unelected activist judges for a very, very long time, going back into the Earl Warren court.
On the left.
Right. Well, there's a long tradition of this attack. By the way, just as a digression, in my newsletter To the Contrary, which I urge you to subscribe to, on Friday, I talked about what's happening here in the state of Wisconsin, where we have an election for state Supreme Court, speaking of judges, and Elon Musk is dumping, I don't know whether it's $11 million or it's $15 million, but this is one seat on one state Supreme Court, and people are now estimating that it will cost $100 million. $100 million. He's been thoroughly politicized. No one's even pretending that this is about the judicial integrity or independence. Every piece of literature I get has the conservative candidate Brad Schimmel, who used to be a normal Republican, with Donald Trump, that this is for Donald Trump, that Donald Trump, needs protection. Donald Trump needs support. And Elon Musk is basically making this a test case of the reach of MAGA. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here in Wisconsin.
Two things occur to me about that. One is, when I hear about Elon Musk doing this, I think of Bill Kristol's comment some years ago, where these guys are bringing out my inner socialist, because it says to me, there's something wrong with a system where one citizen can amass enough money to be able to travel the country like Johnny Appleseed, just throwing scads of money out the window without money that to him is change he finds in the couch cushions.
Yeah.
There comes a moment where you say, is it a reasonable understanding of capitalism to say that we now have a pyramid that gets so narrow at the top that 3 or 4 people can simply go from election to election to election and drop $20 million on the doorstep as if it's like just pulling it out of a money clip in their pocket.
Yeah.
But the other thing about going back to the judges is that it's just remarkable to me how quickly the Republicans went from unelected judges are a real danger to this country to, unless they're ours.
Right.
They're, like judges
Thoroughly
shouldn't.
politicized.
One judge cannot decide everything for the country unless it's a guy in Texas who doesn't like mifepristone.
Right.
And so they've become, in a sense. I mean, I took a lot of static from some of our old friends on the right when I said this Supreme Court is an activist court. It's a radical court, and the people that are supporting Trump who are on the bench are activist judges, because everything they do is stuff that Republicans and conservatives would have absolutely had an aneurysm about if it were a liberal judge doing it. And so now the Republicans are playing a very, I shouldn't say the Republicans even, I should say the Trump movement is playing a very clever double game, which is unelected judges should shut up and get out of the way. They have no authority to do anything. On the other hand, if it's a judge we happen to like in some, district where we went shopping in Texas, that guy should be able to tell the entire country that they can't have a certain medication.
Yeah, there's so much projection and there's so much many double standards. But 2 points here. Number one, this is really a test of Elon Musk's money and his ability to spread that influence, which, by the way, is now one of the dominant political realities of our lives. That Republicans in the House of Representatives are afraid to buck Donald Trump because they know that if they do, Elon Musk is going to come in, they will be primaried, and he will drop more money than God into their districts. If Brad Schimmel wins in Wisconsin, it will be just another indication of how powerful Elon Musk is. If, on the other hand, the pushback is strong enough, and the Democrats are trying to make this a referendum here in Wisconsin on Elon Musk, and if he falls short, it will be a brushback pitch. But the note, I guess I'm also just struck by the degree to which they've internalized the idea that judges are not about determining what the law says, that they are partisan actors, that you actually have a candidate for Wisconsin Supreme Court that is running to advance Donald Trump's agenda, to protect Donald Trump's lawlessness, and he makes no bones about it. There's no euphemism. Okay, so since this is also the week, it's so weird how much stuff is happening in any given week. I want to get your take on the Trump-Vladimir Putin negotiations, where Vladimir Putin, I think, it looks to me, and I'm not the Russia expert, you are, that Vladimir Putin continues to play with and roll Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump does not realize it, got an agreement for a temporary ceasefire on the attack on energy infrastructure or something, but having made Donald Trump wait for more than an hour, is that it? Refused to accept the ceasefire that he had agreed to with Volodymyr Zelensky. So give me your sense of the state of play and what the dynamic is between, what you think the dynamic is between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, which continues to fascinate and horrify.
Well, let me just be Dr. Evil for a moment and say, you mentioned negotiations, or as I would say, negotiations. They were
for
not
people who are not watching on YouTube. Those were
sorry.
Air quotes.
I did the Dr. Evil air quotes. Negotiations. It wasn't a negotiation. First, Putin didn't just keep Trump waiting. I think to really understand the dynamic here of who's the big dog, Putin was on television. Yeah. He's in a big meeting, right? And this guy says, well, Mr. President, I know you have a phone call with Donald Trump and Putin's like, yeah, I do. But go ahead, ask your question, whatever. It was sort of like, you can almost see Putin going, yeah, I have a lot of meetings with a lot of people. Go ahead, pal, ask me your questions. He can wait. And it was really a kind of a power move. It was Putin does this all the time, by the way.
Very much.
He will keep people, heads of state, interviewer, whoever, he keeps them waiting, cooling their heels for hours. It's a tactic that he enjoys. Very Stalinist, by the way, very old school. Mm-hmm. So then he gets on the phone with Trump, who has no idea what he's doing. Remember, Trump never prepares this stuff. He's
Right.
unbriefable. And the
Right.
days when he would be briefed by Jim Mattis or Rex Tillerson or, John, his chief of staff,
Kelly.
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 Jeez, getting old, Charlie.
Yeah. No.
Those days are over. Nobody in that Oval Office knows what the hell is going on. He gets on the phone. Trump says, "Here's an idea. I'll stop attacking stuff that I've already blown to smithereens over and over again." And Zelensky stops attacking stuff that's really hurting me, like oil refineries and Black Sea assets. So I will give up almost nothing. Zelensky gives up everything, and I reserve the right to still keep killing civilians at will. And Trump, obviously,
Deal.
I guess, goes for that, and then Putin says, "Nah, I'm going to just keep." I shouldn't be laughing. I mean, he just kind of waves it away after all that and starts, blasting the shit out of.
He humiliated him before the conversation, and then immediately after the conversation. Yes. Does Trump understand this, or
no,
he doesn't.
He clearly doesn't. I mean, I don't know Donald Trump personally. I can't ask him, do you get that you're being, basically played and made an ass of here? But I think he really believes that Putin likes him. And we're not just on the wrong side here. We are becoming the wrong side here. We are actively conniving with the bad guys, which makes us one of the bad guys. To do these things, because while all this is going on, you would think, for example, if Putin's saying, well, Donald, I'm not going to, do these things, you would think, hey, maybe I ought to hold off on that executive order blowing up the Voice of America and Radio Free Liberty right now.
Oh my God.
Putin hates those. Putin hates Radio Liberty. Like a lot of bad people around the world, really. I don't mean to digress about this, but I have a soft spot. I used to write for Radio Liberty. I've been there. If you really want to understand what it means to do that kind of journalism, you really get a sense of it when you go to Prague and you visit Radio Liberty and realize that they have this installation just on the edge of the city that's practically like a military base because it needs that level of security from all of the kind of horrible bastards in the world that want to kill people who work for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Asia, Radio Marti, all these other organizations. You would think that if Trump understood any of this, he'd say, maybe I can hold back one symbolic chip. Maybe I can, not badmouth Zelensky here. But he doesn't. He doesn't look. The guy who says, I know how to make deals, is a businessman who's had a lifetime of experience of making bad deals. Well,
let me see if you agree with me. I thought one of the big wins for Vladimir Putin was just getting Donald Trump directly involved in the negotiations, because normally you don't bring the president in until the very, very end of the negotiation. You don't put him front and center because Donald Trump is such a bad negotiator. He is notoriously unprepared. He is easily distracted. He's easily flattered. And there's a pattern where he's making one concession after another. You mentioned shutting down Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, all of this last week. At the same time, and this one is like deep breath here, eliminating that whole database, the whole tracking of the 30,000 children who have been kidnapped. I mean, what was that about? I mean,
you would think that everything he can to curry favor with Vladimir Putin. And he doesn't, if he
even doing the unthinkable things. Yeah.
Pardon?
Even doing the unthinkable things. I mean, the unthinkable
but
things.
To him,
the children.
These aren't real people, Charlie.
Yeah.
These aren't real children. These aren't real issues. It's all a matter of what makes me look good, what makes me feel good, it's when you're talking about somebody with this level of gargantuan narcissism, you don't expect them to sit around and think about the fate of 30,000 children. And let me say words that you don't often hear me say when it comes to negotiations. In fairness to Donald Trump, you don't involve the president in any president.
Right.
in these things. No, I don't care if
Right.
it's Ronald Reagan or Joe Biden or Jack Kennedy. You don't.
Obama. Yeah.
The only time the president gets on the phone is to say, hey, all that stuff our teams just worked out. We're good on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where presidents come in. But he has no sense of that. There's nobody that's capable of working those tracks. Everybody is frozen. I mean, technically, we have a Secretary of State. Hypothetically, Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State, but he's not involved. And you said something that was very insightful here, that the real advantage was getting Trump on the phone at all. Because what Putin wants to establish is that Ukraine is not a real country. Therefore, they can never be involved in these negotiations. That the big guys, that the grown-ups, the capos, the commission. I mean, if you think of it in mafia terms, right?
Yeah.
You don't bring in. If you're deciding whether to whack somebody out, you don't bring the guy in to talk about it. The bosses talk about it, and they make a decision. And that's what Putin wants to establish. That the only people that are capable of deciding the fate of Ukraine are Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, not the Europeans, not Zelensky, not the United Nations, not anybody. And that's what Putin wanted all along. And I'm sure I'm going to extend some charity here to somebody in the White House. I'm sure that someone in the White House must have had this thought to say, this is bad, but you can't. I don't think you can brief Donald Trump or explain this stuff. He hears Vladimir Putin wants to talk to you on the phone, and he's like a teenage girl getting a call from Bobby Sherman. I guess I just dated myself with that reference, but my wife.
No, but don't worry about it. I got that. I got that reference. So when you and I are speaking, the big headline, speaking of foreign policy, is that Elon Musk was going to get briefed on our super secret war plans against China. And now Trump is denying that, saying that's fake. Yeah, dear God. I mean, I don't know what else you say about that. And my reaction is that, again, we shouldn't be. It's shocking, but we shouldn't be surprised because Elon Musk is getting everything. Elon Musk is the co-president. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump is denying it, I don't think means anything. I mean, if Elon Musk wants to see stuff, he's going to see stuff. What do you think? What could go wrong there?
The first thing I thought was, so Elon Musk basically has a higher security clearance than J.D. Vance. He is the vice. He's still technically the vice president. I know,
last time I checked.
Imagine, but I had two thoughts immediately, which is, sure. Why wouldn't you give a totally super secret briefing on China to a guy who has multiple business interests in China, regularly talks to the Chinese government? This is any government employee, as I once was, with a security clearance, as I once had, has their stomach in knots right now about how this violates security protocols on so many levels that it's beyond beyond enumeration. The other thing I thought, and I don't know if this will happen, I wondered if the people who are going to give this briefing understand that the version they need to give him is the PowerPointed, what we would give to any random congressman or staffer version, because it sounds terrifying to say we're going to give him an explanation of our war plans with China. There are two things you can do with it. First of all, briefings can occur at several levels of classification. From what I used to teach at the Naval War College, Charlie, I could give you a briefing right now on our war plans with China off the top of my head that have no classification. I never did that as classified work. It'd be stuff that I would just be pulling off the top of my head that would probably be accurate, but not really useful. Okay, so here's some things. We move the Navy. That'd be first, right? It's big water. But the other is that I doubt that Elon Musk will actually understand very much of it if it gets complicated. I mean, it doesn't. Part of getting a briefing like this is that you actually have to have some foundational knowledge of things. So, I mean, I've seen this happen, and I guess I'm trying to be reassuring to people who may listen.
Yeah.
I have seen members of Congress and other senior leaders get briefings that they just couldn't really comprehend. They sort of got the top line, like, are we ready for war with country X? Yes, we are. Okay, good. That, like, there's not a lot, unless he's going to sit there and take pictures and walk out with a folder of documents. I'm not that worried about it, because I'm still praying that the people that are going to give him this understand that, not to give him the crown jewels. But even if they did, I'm not sure that would be useful information to. I'm not sure even giving that Trump doesn't understand this stuff most of the time.
Well, in many ways, though, that's dangerous, because the worst thing in the world is for your adversary to miscalculate. It's interesting enough that Steve Bannon has become the voice. I won't say the voice of reason, but the one person pointing out how conflicted and tone deaf Elon Musk is. He's been pointing out the mistakes he's making on domestic policy. But it was Steve Bannon who, not that long ago, seemed to imply that, seemed to imply that Elon Musk was the Communist Party's bitch, that he was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Communist Party because he had so many ties. Now, whether or not that's true or not, it's interesting that within MAGA, there are people who are thinking this is really, really, really a bad idea. And now, do we know what the excuse?
He's not wrong about, that. I mean, I don't know whether Bannon's right about how owned Musk is. The general thing on which he's right is, in any normal world, someone with Musk's background and contacts wouldn't never be allowed to set foot in that room as a matter of just operational security kind of hygiene. You just wouldn't do it. You would say, oh, you're a well-known industrialist and rich guy, and you'd like a briefing on China. We'll send a guy to your office. Thank you for your interest in national security. We're going to send a couple of guys to your headquarters in San Francisco. Please feel free to ask questions that we will then not answer in any substantive way. I'm hoping that's still what happens. But it's so fascinating, because I think the other reason I don't believe that Bannon really has the best interests of the country at heart. I think
no.
What he's really mad about is, this was supposed to be me joined at the hip to Donald Trump. How did this guy, why am I still podcasting? And this guy is, hanging at Mar-a-Lago and giving impromptu briefings in the Oval Office. And I think, it's always a fascinating window into MAGA world, how much they all hate each other, about what the state that it really is in there.
Well, I mean, it is, the courtiers who are, jostling for, proximity to the crown. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when, if Musk and Hegseth come forward with these plans to massively cut the defense budget, including our combat capabilities. Look, I have no illusions that the Pentagon budget is not grossly bloated, but I have no confidence that they will come up with a coherent, responsible, prudent scheme. And this is the one area where I think there might be some pushback in Congress if they really want to slash our warfighting capabilities.
There's two things about what Musk thinks he's doing and Hegseth, who I think is kind of an absentee landlord, because Pete Hegseth seems only to care about making sure that minorities are scrubbed from DoD websites. By the way, interesting moment that somebody actually got fired. That a Pentagon spokesman actually got turfed over the Jackie Robinson thing, which shows you that,
so stupid.
Because it was so stupid. And it was just, that he just got, he didn't get fired. He hasn't been sent.
There are limits. There is something. Okay.
There is something. You can actually be incompetent enough to get benched occasionally. But the two things are this. One is, when, I agree with you. And again, as a former DoD employee, the Defense Department budget is bloated, but it's bloated in the places that Trump and Musk don't care about. They're not going to cut programs and systems that are funneling billions of dollars to contractors and private industry, which is where, the money is. There's a chunk of the Defense Department that is nothing. And then I think people need to understand this when you talk about cutting the defense budget. What's the big part of the defense budget? Salaries, pensions, healthcare, housing. There are even before Trump came into office, there were going to be hard decisions about an organization where you're allowed to retire at 42 or 43, collect a full pension, and have lifetime medical care. My civilian colleagues and I couldn't collect a full pension until I was a partial pension until I was 59 and a half. I got a modest government pension once I retired at 61. But my civilian colleagues and I always laughed that, the military, for all of its very conservative merit-based values, is actually governed by something that is basically Greek socialism. Where you can retire at 40 and start drawing your pension and have fully covered health care for you and your family for the rest of your life. That's unsustainable. But, if you really cared about getting in there and sort of cutting gigundous programs, I mean, the program to modernize the American strategic nuclear deterrent, that program is way out of control at this point. The numbers are, inconceivably large at this point. They're not going to do that because that's not whose side they're on. They're about, cutting. They think that by cutting a bunch of DEI seminars that they're going to cut the defense budget, and that is negligible. But the other thing they're up to that is already getting pushback from Congress is this kind of crackpot plan to reorganize all the combatant commands.
Yes, right.
And for people that don't know what that means, every geographic region of the world for about 20 odd years now, in order to try to have more internal coherence and mobility and agility, the world's been divided up into commands. So all of South America is Southern Command, right? Mm-hmm. There's one 4-star general. He handles or she handles all of the stuff that goes on with the military, like, from Central America down to Uruguay, right? European Command, that's NATO and our other friends in Europe and just that whole area, including Russia. Indo-Pacific Command, the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean. So they're organized this way, and that's pretty complicated. Trump is saying, well, I want to consolidate these because somehow that will save money. I think that's not only dumb, but there's no real plan for doing it. And it would take a Secretary of Defense. It would take a real Secretary of Defense, someone who has years of experience, understands this system, understands the legislation from the 80s, Goldwater, Nichols, and others that created a lot of this stuff. I mean, this would be a huge lift, even for people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But taking a talk show host and saying, hey, reorganize all the combatant commands is going to be, as I think somebody put it, it's going to be like watching a dog try to screw in a light bulb. I mean, it's just not.
It seems suboptimal.
Suboptimal is a uncharacteristically restrained word for you, Charlie, but it is.
I try to be restrained once in a while.
It is. And you've already had Wicker and somebody else complaining about it. So maybe that'll
Wicker. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the question. I mean, at what point do you have the people, in Congress who recognize how reckless all of this is? And we haven't even gotten to what they're doing with Social Security. There's a certain recklessness going on right now that you get a sense that everybody's sort of taking a deep breath and watching them, go through the China shop. But at some point, you're going to have to. Congress has to get engaged and pass real bills, right? Actual legislation. So far, let's be honest about it, one of the surprises has been that Trump and people like Mike Johnson have been successful in keeping everybody in line. But there are some of these issues where that there are constituencies out there that are going to make this much more difficult.
For 60 days, Charlie. They've kept everybody in line let's remember, this is only 60 days.
Right.
And I wonder, and I guess you're the interviewer, but I guess I'll throw it to you. I wonder if they're waiting for the pain to become enough that they then have the top cover to move against Doge and Musk and all this other. That Harriet Hageman town hall was really interesting in Wyoming when they started yelling "Deport Elon" and Hageman. And this is just the most amazing thing to hear in a deep red district, blurts out, "Why are you so? What did she say? She said, why are you people so obsessed with the federal government?"
Yeah,
Like,
well, you're a
okay.
congresswoman.
Yeah,
Hmm.
okay. Well, and I just wonder if I wonder if everybody, as you say, they've been muted and they're staying together. But this is just a gut instinct. I wonder if they're stepping back and saying, let Elon drive the car off the edge of the cliff rather than us having to go up against him one on one. Let enough anger
Well,
build out
yeah.
there.
Well, and the other analogy would be that the moment they sense blood in the water,
Right.
that they will circle at that point, because right now Musk seems unstoppable, and it's too dangerous to stop him. For what at this point? But yeah, let's cling to that for a moment. It's only 60 days. Tom Nichols, thank you so much for your time joining me this weekend. I appreciate it very much. You can read Tom's stuff in The Atlantic. So have a great weekend, Tom.
Thank you, Charlie.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of To the Contrary podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll keep doing this because now more than ever, it's important to remind ourselves that we are not the crazy ones.